Prequels are cursed. We've all seen our fair share crash and burn. They're constrained by predetermined outcomes, they over-explain mysteries that were better left unsaid, and they inevitably disappoint fans who spent years imagining what came before. So, when id Software announced Doom: The Dark Ages as a prequel to their critically acclaimed reboot series, the gaming world collectively held its breath. It's a minefield, and for a franchise as viscerally immediate and gloriously uncomplicated as Doom, the prospect of a prequel of delving into the dark ages of the Doomslayer initially felt risky. Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal reveled in their forward momentum in a protagonist who was less a character and more a force of nature. His backstory hinted at in tantalizing, almost biblical fragments. To go back to potentially explain the myth felt like flirting with the very essence of what made modern Doom work. But here's the thing, they might have actually cracked the code, because on the surface, it appears id Software hasn't just sidestepped the prequel problem, they actively, aggressively chainsawed their way through it. How? By understanding a fundamental truth about Doom, and perhaps about prequels in general. But first, let's talk about what makes Doom so special. Doom isn't just any franchise, it's the series that literally defined first-person shooters. The original 1993 Doom created the template that every shooter followed for decades, but by the 2000s, that template was showing its age. Doom 3 tried to modernize with horror elements and slower, more tactical gameplay. It was technically impressive, but felt like a different series entirely. The franchise seemed to have lost its identity. Then came Doom 2016 and the follow-up Doom Eternal, a complete reinvention that somehow felt more Doom than anything since the original. id Software didn't just update the graphics, they distilled the essence of what made Doom special and rebuilt it from the ground up. Fast, aggressive, momentum-based combat where stopping meant dying. The reboot was both a critical and commercial success, proving that there was still an appetite for Doom's particular brand of chaos. Which brings us to The Dark Ages, a prequel to this successful reboot, facing all the traditional prequel challenges. To understand what id Software achieved, we need to understand why prequels usually fail. The fundamental problem is what I call the prequel trap, a series of interconnected constraints that doom most prequel projects from the start. First, there's narrative constraint. Your ending is already written, the audience knows where the story goes, which kills dramatic tension. Second, there's character development limitation. You can't fundamentally change who these characters become. Third, there's the mystery erosion problem, explaining too much about what was previously left to imagination. But the biggest issue is what I call backwards design, when creators start with where they need to end up and work backwards, rather than building forward with genuine creative momentum. This typically results in stories that feel mechanically constructed rather than organically developed. The data bears this out. Prequels rarely achieve higher critical success compared to sequels, so how did id Software beat these odds? The answer lies in how id Software reframed the entire prequel concept. Instead of seeing Doom: The Dark Ages as the story before Doom 2016, they approach it as Doom in a completely different context. This shift in perspective changed everything. First, they identified what made Doom 2016 successful. Not the surface elements like guns and demons, but the core mechanical philosophy, momentum-based combat, aggressive player behavior rewarded, and what they call push-forward combat design. Then, instead of asking how to make Doom with old weapons, they asked, how do we create push-forward combat with medieval technology? This led to genuinely innovative solutions. The dragon sequences aren't just Doom on a dragon, they're aerial combat systems that preserve the series' core loop while expanding the possibility space. Hugo Martin, the creative director, explained his philosophy. If you were an F-22 fighter jet in Doom Eternal, this time around we wanted you to feel like an Abrams tank. It's about raw, overwhelming power. This isn't just a cosmetic change, it represents a fundamental shift in design philosophy that preserves Doom's essence while creating entirely new gameplay possibilities. But id Software's smartest move was how they handled the lore problem. Traditional prequels feel compelled to explain everything. How did Anakin become Vader? How did the ring get lost? Why is the protagonist special? This typically diminishes the mythology. id Software took the opposite approach. They deliberately preserved mystery. We learned that the Doomslayer has been fighting demons across multiple dimensions and time periods, but the specifics remain vague. We see medieval technology that seems anachronistically advanced, but the explanation is implied rather than explicit. Most importantly, they use what I call mythological framing. the story is presented as legend and saga rather than historical documentation. This gives them the creative freedom while actually enhancing the mystique around the character. This approach has precedent in successful mythological storytelling. It's how God of War successfully reinvented itself, and how the best fantasy franchises maintain their sense of wonder across multiple entries. The real proof of id Software's approach is in the mechanical innovations that emerged from their constraints, because they couldn't rely on increasingly powerful weapons to mark progression. They had to develop more sophisticated combat systems. The shield system introduces defensive positioning to a series that traditionally rewarded pure aggression, but it's implemented in a way that maintains Doom's pacing. The shield saw mechanic turns defense into offense, and shield parrying creates opportunities for aggressive follow-ups. But the real crucible for any Doom game, prequel or not, is often the boss design. And here, Dark Ages didn't just meet expectations, it hammered them into new blood-soaked shapes. The encounters id created felt authentically Dark Ages, vast, imposing, almost biblical in their fury, yet they all adhere to Doom's core combat philosophy of relentless pressure and resource management. The Atlan mech sequences, those glorious excursions into kaiju-esque demonic demolition, stood as a towering achievement. They represented a perfect synthesis of heavy machinery combat and Doom's intricate mobility-focused arena design. A glorious spectacle of destruction that frankly could not have existed, wouldn't have fit in any other iteration of Doom. It was a gamble that paid off in roaring metallic spades. What id Software has achieved with Dark Ages represents a broader shift in how smart developers approach franchise expansion. Instead of being constrained by existing narrative, they're using it as a creative springboard. This approach of mechanical translation rather than narrative constraint offers a template for other developers. Final Fantasy VII Remake showed similar thinking, translating turn-based combat philosophy into real-time action while still preserving the strategic depth. The key insight is that audiences don't actually want the same experience again, they want the same feelings generated by new experiences. By focusing on emotional and mechanical continuity rather than narrative literalism, id Software has created space for genuine innovation within established frameworks. Ultimately, many prequels fail because they prioritize a rigid adherence to established canon over simply being, well, good. They become exercises in futility, trying to make all the pieces fit even if the resulting picture is unsatisfying. Doom: The Dark Ages seems to be saying, what if the Doom Slayer fought demons in a heavy metal album cover version of The Dark Ages, with a shield that's also a chainsaw, boomerang, and a giant mech? And the answer to that is unequivocally, yes please. It's a premise so inherently Doom in its ludicrous, over-the-top coolness that the prequel aspect almost becomes an excuse to explore new, brutal avenues of gameplay and aesthetic, rather than a narrative straitjacket. The prequel problem often stems from a misunderstanding of what audiences truly value. It's rarely a desperate need for encyclopedic knowledge of a fictional universe. More often, it's the desire for compelling experiences, for engaging mechanics, for a world that feels rich and inviting, even if it's inviting you to rip and tear. id Software, by focusing on a distinct gameplay identity, a mythic rather than historical approach to lore, and an unwavering commitment to the core essence of their protagonist, didn't just make a Doom prequel. They are showing everyone else how to make prequels, by making the past feel just as brutal, inventive, and unapologetically fun as the future we already know.